Welcome to Normal Island's The Debrief, a three-way panel show where we look at the past week in politics. Now, The Debrief is usually at the end of the week, but given that we've had a week off, it seemed fitting to discuss the explosive stories of the last 7 days. My name is Curtis Daly, and I will be joined by Turn Left contributors Callum Taylor and Lewis Aaron. But let's get on with the show. Now, this past week, Labour have announced that they intend to ban puberty blockers permanently. Health Secretary Wes Streeting has reportedly indicated that the Labour government will extend the Tories' controversial emergency ban on puberty blockers for trans youth. The medication, primarily used for those under the age of 18, halts unwanted elements of physical puberty. The NHS has described its effects as reversible. Bans on NHS prescriptions have been enforced in England, Scotland and Wales since shortly after the publication of the CAST report, which advised scrutiny of the medication in April. The emergency ban lasts until the 3rd of September and applies to all UK private doctors and those based in the European Economic Area of Switzerland. Those in breach could face up to 2 years in prison. Now, this is despite the fact that puberty blockers have been used for decades and were initially used for treatments that had nothing to do with transitioning. They are reversible, yet suddenly we have a Labour government that wants to extend the ban permanently. Transactional and the Good Law Project said they will mount a legal challenge if this goes ahead. Other headlines of the week: Jeremy Corbyn has written in The Guardian about building a new grassroots movement to challenge the political establishment. Building for the future starts now here in Islington. We are planting the seeds for a new way of doing politics. That starts with our first People's Forum. It will be a monthly opportunity for residents to hold me, the elected representative, to account. It will be a chance for local people to ask me anything about the month gone by and give me instructions for the month ahead. It will be a shared democratic space for local campaigns, trade unions, tenants unions, debtors unions, and national movements to organise together for the kind of world we want to live in, listening to the voice of those who elected me, discussing the concerns and hopes of our community, empowering each other to do something about it. That is what real democracy looks like. The general election did not allow for the full expression of people power. Rather, we saw a rejection of the political establishment, leading to a loveless landslide. This election saw the second lowest turnout since 1918 and the smallest combined vote share for the two main parties since 1945. Public discontentment with the broken political system will only grow as the government fails to make the real change that people expect. Now, this article has made some of the usual suspects sniper him, especially his correct analysis that Labour have won a loveless landslide. I'm sorry, but that is true. Now, since the article, there have been developments that Jeremy Corbyn is in talks with the SNP. While it is early days, Corbyn told the Sunday National that he sees a progressive alliance developing in Westminster, looking to hold Starmer's government to account on these issues and more, including Gaza. Obviously, 5 of us independent MPs on our own are going to be quite limited in what we can do, he said. But add that to the Greens on many issues, the SNP and Plaid Cymru, and a significant bunch of Labour MPs, and I think you'll rapidly see a progressive alliance developing. I'll be encouraging that. Asked whether he had already discussions with other parties, including the SNP, Corbyn said initial discussions have already gone ahead. I take myself to the SNP table in the tea room occasionally. We enjoy tea together and we have a chat, he said. And yes, I've had a chat with a number of colleagues elected from the SNP and Plaid Cymru. Now, it was good to see Corbyn working with other parties and at least a handful of Labour MPs in order to try and support some progressive alliance. That should be welcome. Now, Labour faced its first challenge in the form of the two-child benefit cap, as the SNP will try to table an amendment in the King's Speech debate. Although with a majority of 180 seats, it's unlikely any changes will be made. But the SNP are providing an opposition to a Tory and now Labour policy of keeping 500,000 children in poverty. Now, later on, we would, of course, talk about the shocking incident that happened last week where a failed assassination attempt on Donald Trump at a rally took place, killing one supporter in the crowd and Trump getting away with a bloody ear. But sticking with the UK for the moment, let's bring up the panel. Lewis, I'll start with you. I mean, Wes Streeting is going further than Tories and wants to permanently ban puberty blockers, which is it's a disgrace, isn't it?
Yeah, not only is he going further than the Tories, he's going further than many Republicans in America. Like we're now putting Wes Streeting and senior members of the Labour Party on the further right of some international right-wing parties across the world. They've often obviously fought against things like puberty blockers, but not actually gone as far to really try and ban them the way Wes Streeting is aiming. And again, it's against a manifesto pledge as well. I can't remember the exact quote, but it was something along the lines of respecting the indignities of trans people, which is this the first big U-turn that we're going to see from a Labour manifesto pledge? I'm quite shocked by it, really. The Cass report specifically said to advise caution, and that's what some people did. Now, for some reason, Wes Streeting is taking it upon himself to go further than the Cass report. So what evidence is he going off of this? I just don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's as you brought the Cass report, really important stuff, but it goes beyond that, doesn't it? I mean, there was an emergency ban from the Tories, and now they're extending it to a permanent ban, which is not based in science. I mean, look, the point I made earlier is that puberty blockers has been used for decades, and it was initially used for medical healthcare that had nothing to do with transitioning. Nobody had a problem with it then, but now it's become a talking point for those that want to transition. Oh, well, suddenly it's not safe. Suddenly the jury is out there whether the evidence is there that is safe. And look, it is safe, although otherwise we would have used it for so long. But it's clearly become a political issue. I mean, Callum, I want to bring you in on this. I mean, what do you make of Labour out right-winging, if that's even a word, out culture warsing, let's say that, on the Tories, and many, and as Lewis said, many Republicans in the US.
It's appalling. I mean, we shouldn't be surprised about this, to be fair. I left the Labour Party about 12 months or so ago now, and one of the main factors for that was an ongoing culture of transphobia within the party, and a lack of party leadership taking action against people within the party who were transphobic, namely Rosie Duffield, for example. And I said then, that I couldn't remain in a party that was allowing transphobia, and there's many other reasons why I also couldn't be in the Labour Party anymore, but that's for another discussion. But it goes back to that thing, of what people say about when someone tells you who they really are, you should believe them the first time. A lot of people were trying to tell me, oh, they're not transphobic. They're just trying to appeal to a certain type of voter. And when they get into power, they'll do things to help. And we need to remember that the Labour Party did pledge in their manifesto to protect trans people and to work towards making, I can't remember the exact wording, but to work towards making a nicer environment for trans people to live in. And one of the first things that the government have done within a week of being in charge of the country is to take action that goes much further than what the Cass report recommends, that goes much further, like Lewis has alluded to what some Republicans are doing in the state, and to ban puberty blockers in the use of new patients for gender dysphoria. And like you say, Curtis, they're saying that it's a safety issue, but it's not. It's not unsafe to give the same medication to cis teenagers or children who need it for other healthcare purposes. So is it a safety issue, or is there something else going on here? I am also appalled by the way in which the Labour Party are behaving in the appeasement to Harry Potter author J.K. Rowling.
Yeah.
What is that about? I would love to be able to just snap my fingers, put out a tweet, and get a meeting with the Prime Minister and all the ministers in government to discuss a whole host of problems that affect me and people in the community around me. But I can't do that.
Go on.
I was just going to say, but I can't do that. Even if I want to meet with my own local MP, I have to try and book onto a day when they're doing a surgery and organise it all that way. J.K. Rowling, who is pretty much getting on for billionaire status again, she puts a tweet out, says, I want to speak to the Labour Party. And they say, all right, then we'll talk to you. Why does she? And also not on women's rights, which if she was meeting with Jess Phillips, or the Equalities Minister to talk about violence against women and girls or other women's issues, that would make sense. But she wants to meet with the Health Secretary to talk about trans issues. She's not trans. She's not even a member of the LGBT community. So who the hell is she to pretend to be this voice on trans issues when she's actively campaigned against trans people for, by my last count, at least a good 4, nearly 5 years now?
I mean, contrary to doing politics differently, if you're a billionaire and that gets you a meeting with the Prime Minister or those in the cabinet, that is an issue of democracy. It's an issue of, equal speech, and you're right. If you want to speak to, it's hard enough speaking to your local councillor or MP with them not replying with a generic email. But because J.K. Rowling is rich and famous, she's got her in there. But why aren't medical experts having equal prominence? Why aren't members of the LGBTQ community? Why aren't trans people? If you're going to bring J.K. Rowling in, and I don't know what her qualifications are or expertise are, she doesn't have any expertise in medical care, then at least bring people from different
it's because, unlike J.K. Rowling, those experts and those individuals don't have 40 million Twitter followers.
Exactly, yeah. But
that's what it boils down to.
To pick up on your point, though, and Lewis, I want you to come in on this as well, is there's two distinct issues there.
14 million.
Yeah, there's two issues there. One is, we're doing this to appeal to those that think like J.K. Rowling to get into power. But there's another issue, which you pointed out, which is that Wes Streeting is going ahead with this when they're in power. So for the folks who are part of LGBT Labour or the queer community that is affiliated with the Labour Party, what do they say to that? Because they are pushing on this policy because they believe in it, not because they kind of want to appease certain voters to get into power. Wes Streeting doesn't need to do this policy. The Tories haven't recouped their electoral chances within a week. It's very unlikely they're going to do it in 5 years' time, and a second Labour government is very likely. So this has nothing to do with electability. They just simply are transphobic. Lewis, I'll bring you in on that one.
The thing that scratches the back of my head when it comes to Wes Streeting is that every time I see him on camera talking in an interview, I can just see in his eyes leadership. And I feel like this could be part of his, longer term plan to not just appeal to the center, but to go a bit further so he can shore up his leadership position in the future. Because again, it's against the Labour manifesto to do this, not like strictly speaking on the words, but they said again they were going to end the indignities towards trans people. The fact that they're even, they even considered and maybe going ahead with J.K. Rowling is just awful. Like her Twitter, her X, whatever, is an absolute cesspool. Yes, the occasional tweet makes it into the newspaper, which is just a average, women's rights are getting washed away. But if you actually just go onto her X account, it is unhinged. It's genuinely insane, some of the things that she tweets out. And the fact that they'd want to be in the same room potentially as a person like that is ridiculous. And in terms of speaking to people, from what I've read, Wes Streeting hasn't actually spent any time really with any actual trans people. If you actually sit down with most people who have successfully transitioned from a young age, with medical experts, with fantastic support, you will find very, very positive outcomes. And most of the negative stories that have ever made it into the media about young people and issues they've had with transitioning and gender dysphoria tend to come from a lack of resources tied to the NHS, not the actual process itself, which again, according to dozens of European countries, is absolutely safe.
And also the biggest regret rate seems to stem on social stigmatism, and in the US they can't afford the bills. It's not because they actually regret transitioning, it's because the support isn't there. But look, there are people who have a different view on this than to me, for example. But to bring it back to the Labour Party or the government, right, it is not simply a difference of opinion, it is ignoring all of the medical experts, all the studies. And the thing is, though, ask yourself this question, someone who's watching who probably doesn't agree with us, and say, I don't want puberty blockers going to kids. If you ask me, what would I rather? People, young children using reversible and as in that statement I read out, the NHS says it is reversible, medication or children committing suicide, what would you rather? Because a lot of the TERFs or the transphobes say, well, we just care about kids unless they're trans and they kill themselves, and they don't seem to give a shit about them then. So I think if we want to protect kids, surely we should be helping these people, and healthcare is part of it, right?
And
Puberty blockers is part of that healthcare.
But also, surely, again, I'm all for if we're giving medication to anyone that isn't safe and that hasn't been tested properly, we absolutely should be ceasing that medication until we know that it's safe. But that isn't what's happening here. Like I said earlier, they're not stopping the use of the medication. They're not going to stop giving puberty blockers to children. Full stop. They're only going to stop giving the puberty blockers to those children who are experiencing gender dysphoria.
Yes,
and that is very clearly an attack on the trans community because they can't argue safety at all.
Yes, exactly. If you're going to recommend or ban certain medical practices based on the reason why they're doing it, not on what it actually does physiologically, that is not based in science. That is not based in safety or caring about these people. It's a political one. Like you've just rightly pointed out. If the practices of using puberty blockers on kids, on cis kids, right, that has nothing to do with transitioning. If that's still going to go ahead, but they're only going to block it if people are suffering or going through gender dysphoria, that is not an issue of evidence or safety. That is simply saying, I don't like the fact that trans people exist, therefore you can't have your healthcare. You really can't argue that, can you? Based on a logical... Go on.
I was just going to ask you both whether you think that this will actually come to pass, because there's been a huge backlash from certainly Labour members in the Socialist campaign group specifically, but also from elsewhere in the Labour Party, as well as from some of the other opposition parties against this. And there's almost a feeling of like with the 2-child benefit cap, which we'll come on to in a bit. There is a feeling of some sort of pushback from within, even government backbenches already on this. And I just wonder whether you both think that this might be the first government U-turn that we see, where the Wes actually goes, let's hold off for now, and sort of, if he pushes it back further down the line just because of this pushback he's got, or whether you think it's something that they're just going to say, no, we said we're doing it, and if half the government disagree, then stuff them.
I mean, Lewis, do you want to come in on that one?
Yeah, I can't. If they actually, bring this to Parliament for a vote and actually go ahead with it, it's the beginning of this Parliament. I can't imagine they would bring it without knowing it's going to pass. They're going to get those whips into action, and if it doesn't come to fruition, my only guess would be is that they couldn't actually rally the party, which still, either way, it makes them look potentially weak. I'd love to almost see this go to a vote, just to see where people stand, despite the fact this is playing with people's lives. The whole thing is just extremely frustrating. It's the beginning of a new Parliament. It goes against the manifesto pledge, and it's just it doesn't make sense to go in this direction already. And on top of that, with it going to Parliament potentially, I still again don't agree with parliamentarians legislating on stuff like this. This should be given over to a specialist board from a wide range of medical experts to discuss on. And I know they've said that they're going to do that, but again, like the CAS report itself, it's it's useful to have a report like that, but it's one person, right? We need a massive team for this. We need experts from all around the world talking about this, because we want to make sure that it is actually working. We all want kids to be okay. We want to give them medications that are going to help them. But this type of thing should be taken out of Parliament, I think.
But Lewis, they're also not implementing the CAS report. I mean, they're claiming that this is to do with following through on the recommendations in the CAS report, but nowhere in the CAS report does it say that puberty blockers should be banned.
Yeah,
it explicitly says, like you alluded to earlier, that they need to that there are issues within trans healthcare. Often, a lot of it that it points to are problems that I think we would all agree are also issues. Where trans youth aren't getting enough support emotionally, they're not getting enough mental health support, they're not getting access to the care quickly enough. All those other things that trans people often say that they are struggling with in terms of trying to get access to the care. But it certainly doesn't say let's just cut off a piece of
Mm.
medication that we know when trans youth don't have access to this, the suicide risk increases. It doesn't say to do that, but they're using that as like a get out for it. Oh well, we have to follow through on.
Well, I mean, a lot of people predicted that the Cass report was going to be weaponized by the political right in order to justify their ends, because there's a lot of problems in the report. But you're absolutely right. It doesn't say for one moment that all puberty blockers should be blocked. It does not say that. It says that there's not enough evidence and more studies should be done on it. And then there's a lot of disagreement there because people feel like there's been enough studies, right? But that is a far cry to what the government are doing. Now, the thing that strikes me the most is that, yes, a right-wing political party or a political movement would jump on the Cass report to use it to attack trans people. But it's Wes Streeting, a member of the LGBT community. He is gay. The Labour Party, a supposedly progressive party. Keir Starmer said he wants to sideline culture war things. And they're weaponizing, actually, the Cass report to push through, I would say, extremely transphobic policies. And they're supposed to be the centre-left party. Do you hear what I'm saying? That to me is crazy.
The only thing I can think of is that, another thing could be actually is that they're trying to, cut off the head of the snake a little bit early. They're already predicting what's the culture war that's coming for them when they're fighting for the next parliament and fighting for the next election, because the Tories have literally nothing to go off of. Reform as well. Like, the only thing that they can wage war with necessarily, depending on how the next 5 years goes, is culture war. That's always going to be there.
So that's funny, because Keir Starmer said he doesn't want to engage in the culture wars, and it looks like that rather than progressive parties responding to the culture war from the political right, it looks like that the Labour Party are engaging in the cultural wars from the right in order to try and nullify the Conservatives somehow, which obviously won't happen because you can't play that game.
They don't have any reason to do that.
Exactly.
Two weeks ago, absolutely, it could have been argued, as many did argue incorrectly. I think has been proven, but as many did argue that it's just a ploy because we want to get certain voters on hand. But they've just got a majority of, what is it, like 190 odd
180,
seats? Like,
yeah.
The Labour government that we have now will be in power for the next 5 years. There is no need within a week, just over, of them being in power for them to start using the culture wars to take rights away from and punish effectively trans people for simply being who they are, and denying them access to vital healthcare simply to appease another type of voter who didn't vote for them a week ago and who frankly probably won't vote for them next time anyway. But even if they wanted to keep those voters happy, they've got 5 bloody years to do that.
But also, where's the evidence to suggest that they're keeping voters happy when they're in government? Because they don't have a mandate for it. Because as you pointed out, in their manifesto, they talk about protecting trans people. So going through with a permanent block on puberty blockers is actually against their own manifesto. So it could be argued that those that voted for the Labour Party, the voters obviously need to increase your vote share. You need to have more votes the next time round, but you also want to keep the existing people that voted for you. You're pissing off them voters because they didn't vote for this as well. So when it comes to why they're doing this, when it comes to the evidence, they're wrong. When it comes to the reasoning why they're doing this, there is no reason to do it. And even when it comes to electability, they're going to want to keep the people that voted for them in the first place. And as you pointed out, in the manifesto, it talks about protecting trans people. It didn't say anything about keeping the puberty blockers in the manifesto. It doesn't say that. I want to go back to your original question, which you asked both of us, which is, will this pass? Because you're right, there are some people who are talking about this, saying this is wrong, and maybe this is the first split in the Labour Party. I don't have any reason to believe that this won't pass. They have a 180 seat majority, but they also have, the Labour Party have a monopoly on their right-wing faction. It's not like there is, they like to say it a lot, a broad church. There isn't a broad church because any sort of dissent has been kicked out. So there's enough right-wing people in the Labour Party to get this through. In terms of the Socialist Campaign Group, they have showed time and time again how ineffective they are. It's getting smaller by the day anyway, so I don't expect them to mount much of an opposition to it. I mean, they might do a strongly worded letter, which is what some of them have done, which has become pathetic now, kind of like the 2-child benefit cap. I don't see how I mean, it's good to campaign on these issues. It's good to say I am a Labour MP and I disagree with the government. I'm not saying that the left and the party should shut up about it, but there is I don't see that there's going to be any tangible opposition to it. I don't see the two-child benefit cap being scrapped because there's 5 or 6, maybe a push 10 MPs that are against it, and the same with this. Again, they should campaign on it, but I have no reason to believe that this won't pass.
Yeah, it's a difficult one. I think they. I mean, as far as the Socialist Campaign Group are concerned, I do think that now that the Labour Party are in government, I feel like they will have a slightly more of a sort of an influence than what they've been able to have previously. Similar to the the European Research Group that caused a load of problems for Boris Johnson, although the membership of that was significantly bigger. But I do think that there will be a part for them to play, especially when you've got opposition parties that are also on side with them. I mean, we were talking earlier, you were talking about Jeremy Corbyn's comments regarding more of a united front from the left within Parliament. And I think that on issues like this, all the other left-wing MPs that are in Parliament, along with those that do remain in the Labour Party, might between them and together be able to make some change. I mean, the numbers still don't add up to more than the majority.
Let's talk about that. I mean, it pivots well to our next story, which is independent MPs and Jeremy Corbyn in particular. I mean, he's been in the news. He wrote a Guardian piece about Labour's loveless landslide. It's triggered all the right people, but he wants to build a new sort of political coalition from the grassroots, and obviously developments that he wants to work. He's open to work with the SNP, the Green Party, and Plaid Cymru. So both of you, I want you to jump in on this. What do you make of this new grassroots coalition headed by Jeremy Corbyn? Is this another pointless project, or do you think, given the renewed sense of, I would say, progressive politics from the election, and 5 left-wing MPs, 4 Green MPs, Jeremy Corbyn taking on the Labour machine and winning, is this significant? What do you guys think?
Well, I think when it comes to that point when Labour do need opposing, because I don't think it's fair that they need massively opposing right now. Of course, we're talking about West Streeting and puberty blockers, but in terms of further down the line, we need those voices to be opposing them. We don't want that to be reform. We don't want that to be conservative. We want that to be the left-wing branch of this country. We had lots of seats around this country which are historically Labour seats, which got really crappy turnout. I think like even Angela Rayner, who is, noted to be very popular, but that's just on social media, I don't know. She got like a 49% turnout. There are mass amounts of voters out there that need unlocking, and I suspect a lot of them were disenfranchised lefties who, they're vying, they're waiting for the leftist revolution to come along and give them some good policies, to give them some good opposition. We need those voices out there, and hopefully, if they keep going with this momentum, if they work together, and obviously keep any quibbles private, then they can capture that group of people. And even if that only increases their vote margin by a few percent at the next election, that would still historically be a victory, because the Green Party, bigger than ever now, again, independent candidates, bigger than ever now. It's something to be grabbed, and I think it's something that, if long as they keep the momentum going, they can really command this space.
Callum, what do you think? Do you think this is a viable alternative? Do you think this is going to work, or is it just another opinion in the Guardian and that's about it?
No, I agree with much of what Lewis has said. Really, I think they, at the end of the day, what other option do they have right now? Right, they're in the situation that they're in. Labour have got the majority that they've got. The way I see it is, it's surely a good thing that politicians are talking to each other, regardless of what party they're from, and they're talking about where they can help each other out and work together in order to hold governments to account. I mean, surely that's what politics should be across the board anyway. People working together for the greater good of the people within the country, right? And I think, particularly, there are going to be issues like what we were just discussing with West Streeting, like the 2-child benefit cap. There are going to be issues that definitely need some pushback, but that does have to come from the left. There's also going to be times when I imagine Corbyn, the Independents, the Greens, and the SNP are going to be voting in favour with the government, probably on quite a lot of things. There's probably, I can see the government introducing lots of things over the next 5 years that all of those individuals and parties agree with and want to also see implemented. But it's ensuring that when it's really necessary, that there is a united front coming from the left, and it's united together with sort of one voice and one, that making sure that they're all singing off the same hymn sheet. Because what we don't want to end up is in a situation where we've got some on the left saying, oh, well, actually it should be this, and some on the left saying actually it should be that, and the sort of disagreements going on. If they can come together, it will make voting easier. It'll make it easier for amendments. On amendments, it also means that you don't necessarily have a situation where you've got loads of different people from different areas all trying to put amendments in that effectively say the same thing, which we have seen in the past, where actually we can say, right, what do we want the amendment to be? Let's all agree on one that, have whoever it is propose it. Let's all agree on it, and we'll all agree to vote it through, and it's something that they all agree on. And then it just makes some of that parliamentary process a little bit easier. But like I say, I do think that politicians should be talking to each other anyway. And also something that's really important is it also helps alienate some of the right wing, which we need to not alienate them completely. And there's certainly some campaigns like proportional representation where some of those right-wing MPs, including Farage and Reform, could definitely be useful to help with that discussion. However, generally speaking, I think if the left are shown to have this big united front in the Houses of Parliament, it sends a message to the electorate that the left are working together, the left are united, the right are falling apart, the Conservative Party still haven't worked out what they're going to do in the leadership, they're still squibbling amongst themselves. Suella Braverman's causing a load of problems again, they're all arguing and falling out. Reform are falling out with each other already. There's a whole drama regarding the fact that Tice has now become the deputy leader and other people have been thrown out, and Ben Habib has stepped down and all that nonsense. Meanwhile, on the left, they're all saying, let's work out what we can do to work together. And I think it shows unity, and I think it shows strength.
It's also about putting people on record, right? So if the left wing of Parliament can do an amendment to a bill, perhaps it's the two-child benefit cap, they can turn around and say, we tried to make this change and we were rejected. But also in the future, think about 4 years down the line, depending where we are, and it comes to interviews leading up to an election, and they can turn around and say, you voted against the two-child cap, you voted against the two-child cap, and that's hundreds of MPs potentially around the country, and that's very powerful. It can be used on panels and shows, anything like that.
We'll have a graphic up.
What's that?
I said we'll have a graphic up on our show.
Yeah, it's just about putting them on record.
Yeah.
The question I have though is, I mean, they're dubbing it another progressive alliance, but it's not really happened before, right? So back when Jeremy Corbyn was Labour leader, for example, why was there no big, broad coalition between the SNP then, when the SNP had 55 seats? Now they've got 10. So I guess I'm skeptical. I mean, I obviously support it, but I'm skeptical because there was more probably representation of progressive MPs in Parliament 5 years ago than there is today.
The SNP had a huge mandate for independence, which was something that I don't think.
I don't think that would have. I don't think that would have replaced any progressive policy. I mean,
I think it would have been used. I think it would have been used significantly against him, though, if he'd said we're going to work together with the SNP. Immediately, all the headlines were going to be Jeremy Corbyn wants Scotland to be independent and he's going to break up the UK. It would have been another thing to smear him by.
But I guess it's not. The thing I'm trying to say is that right now there's probably why would it work now if there wasn't a force of progressive politics? It doesn't have to be headed by Jeremy Corbyn. Why wasn't there a grassroots progressive alliance in Parliament when the arithmetic within Parliament was probably favoured to the left? Now, of course, because this time around Jeremy Corbyn has the freedom to do this, I absolutely agree with what you're saying. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn as Labour leader did what every other Labour leader did, and said there's going to be no pacts, no coalitions. I get that. and maybe that stifled it, and maybe our left-wing movement still hasn't transcend Jeremy Corbyn. That without him, there's still no grassroots movement, which is why a progressive alliance only went as far as tactical voting, and that was it. Maybe it is different this time, but I guess I question. Overall, there seems like there's less progressive MPs in Parliament. I mean,
I want to push back a little bit on the idea that the SNP are necessarily progressive. They are a broad church. Often, for everyone from Stephen Flynn to, oh God, what's his name?
Ian Blackford.
Ian Blackford, thank you very much. Nicola Sturgeon, these are all very progressive people. They've been the voices of the SNP. It's been very smart. But if you actually look a little bit deeper into the SNP, they are a broad church. Everyone has said that if Scotland ever got independence, the SNP would cease to exist and lots of their members would go to the right. Just right now, we've got is it she the deputy or the co-leader, Kate Forbes? She's an evangelical Christian who refused to answer whether she supports gay marriage during the leadership bid when Hamza Yousaf won. We do actually have a lot of right wingers in the SNP.
And that's what I find quite funny when Jeremy Corbyn is asked, "Will you work with the SNP?" It's like, "Yeah, I'll work with the SNP." When the SNP has 10, was it 9 MPs? 9 or 10 MPs, 9 MPs, right? They don't have 10, and the deputy leader is Kate Forbes, who is very, very right wing. But again, we had before the election, loads of SNP MPs when Hamza Yousaf was the leader, he was very progressive, especially on Gaza. So I find that quite strange. But again, it's probably out of Jeremy Corbyn's control in that sense.
It's also a Westminster alliance, right? And the MPs that are left from the SNP, I mean, I don't know a lot about all of them, but the SNP in Westminster is still led by Stephen Flynn. Now, he is quite progressive. So when it comes to, I saw Corbyn talking about, well, it was in this quote actually that we showed earlier about him, sitting around the tea room with the SNP folk every now and then. And I think actually the people that he's mixing with on a daily basis from the SNP are those more progressive MPs. Absolutely, in Scottish Parliament and elsewhere, there are some horrors, but the people that are in Parliament, which is where it matters for what Corbyn's talking about, are more progressive. But I think one of the reasons why now
they're not a political force anymore. I mean, there's 9 of them, and not all. That's what I mean. Not all 9 of them are progressive anyway. They have completely destroyed themselves. They were.
But what use would have this sort of coalition and agreement have been when the Tories had an 80-seat majority and the Tories were in government? Because I think where it might be useful is that even though the Labour Party have very clearly, since Starmer took over, shifted over to the right from where they were, significantly from where they were under Corbyn, they do still have a lot of MPs who are progressive. They've got a lot of, not as many as I would like, but they do have a decent number of MPs who would consider themselves socialist. And they do still have a hell of a lot of very left-wing members in the membership who have stuck by, who haven't, who've done what Jeremy Corbyn told me personally to do, which is to stay in the party and fight from the inside. Yes, there's less of them, but the party as a whole still has quite a lot of those people inside. And actually, if we are looking at how we can make progressive change over the next 5 years, then the current government is going to be able to be swayed much more easily than the previous one was. So if you've got a strong force together on the left now, it's much more likely, even though there's less SNP MPs or whatever, it's much more likely now that the current makeup of government are more likely to listen to this alliance on the left than the last government would have done. It's still going to be difficult.
I'm not sure. I mean, look, to me, it would have made far more sense if Jeremy Corbyn had essentially, after realizing that he was never going to be the Labour candidate, just said, "I'm going to run as independent," get kicked out the party. It was clear he was never going to be a Labour MP from 2.5 years ago, 2 years ago. At that point, I think Jeremy Corbyn should have said, "I'm going to run as independent," left the Labour Party because he would have been booted out, and spent the next 2 years working with all these progressive SNP members of Parliament and essentially pushing the Labour Party, which we all know was going to win, on good policies. I think it's more effective to say during a general election campaign that the Labour Party doesn't support the 2-child benefit cap being scrapped, whatever. All these things that we did talk about in the general election, but would have been far more powerful if Jeremy Corbyn was kind of this leader of this independent movement with far more SNP members of parliament and incoming Green MPs too, and held Labour to account before they won the election. I think it would have been far more powerful than now, where Jeremy Corbyn, only 6 weeks out from the general election, said, well, I'm essentially going to be independent. Only had 6 weeks to campaign on this. I mean, look, he spent most of his efforts on his own campaign to win. And now after the election, 180 seat majority for the Labour Party, they have no pressure whatsoever. And I'm sorry, I don't even see pressure from the handful of left-wing MPs in Parliament, because I don't know how. I mean, do we know how many left-wing MPs really are there actually who are going to stand up to the Labour Party? I think it's actually less likely. I think it's more likely that you're going to get pressure before the election, when we knew the Tories were toast. We didn't know how many seats Labour were going to get, and could have made them scared, because like, we're going to win this election now, but oh shit, there's like 45, 50 MPs who are now working together during a general election to campaign for good policies.
I think the problem there, though,
far more effective than today.
I think the problem there, though, is the general election for a lot of people on the left was about the issue with Palestine, and that was the focus for particularly a lot of the independent campaigns. I mean, where we've seen independents win seats and where we've seen independents take huge chunks out of Labour majorities, it hasn't come from issues of poverty and abuse against women and girls.
Hamza being...
It's all been Palestine and Gaza, and I think that was the focus. Rightly, I think that needed to be, something that Labour were held to account on. But because that's been the focus, I feel like there probably wasn't the room for this sort of wider alliance around everything else.
Yeah, I guess, but then, I mean, when Hamza was leader, he was pro-Gaza. I think that would have been a great opportunity to have an independent Jeremy Corbyn with all these people, with the SNP. Now it's a more centrist figure.
I would love to know, though, what
9 MPs,
what Corbyn was thinking in terms of, like, I don't know whether he's just a stubborn bastard or whether he genuinely believed that the Labour Party were going to welcome him back in before the general election. But I'm sure when we have him on the channel next, we can ask him that, because it will be really interesting to know sort of why he waited until that last moment and why he didn't do what you're suggesting. Because, like you say, he could have started this 2 years ago. But
well, Lewis, I mean, we've spoken for a while. Lewis, I want to bring you in on this actually, and what your thoughts are here.
Yeah, I feel like it is a wasted opportunity from Jeremy. Maybe we'll never really know why he delayed on this. Was it because he knew it would be a big battle, and obviously he won it, and not just won it, but got a very decent sized majority. But maybe just the prospect of having to do that, it was a lot, right? He spoke to 50% of registered voters in his constituency. He knew that it was going to be such a big fight. So the only leniency I can give him on this missed opportunity is the fact that it's possible that this fight was so big. He is getting older, and now there's a wasted opportunity. I think these things can always catch up. I think, quickly going back though to the point of like Parliament and who's left and who's not, we won't know yet. There's 200 and something new MPs. It's going to take a while for people to form, caucuses and groups and whatever else you want to call them. They will come out. We will find out who they are. They'll have their own ambitions. They'll have their own ideologies. And I think we just have to, sadly, in the world of politics, it's hard, but be patient and see what comes out over the next few years.
We want to know now.
I think this is a good thing, obviously, though, right? This is what is needed, and it's the best we have. And I think that what I was saying earlier, unfortunately, I don't think the left has quite transcended Jeremy Corbyn. So we still kind of need him as a figurehead. What he's trying to do is still very much needed. And I think, to me, what is going to be really successful is campaigning on single issues, rather than obviously there should be a broad movement. And of course, Jeremy's probably going to try and entice that. But single issues will be very good. So when Jeremy Corbyn is writing to Keir Starmer about Gaza, I think he should try and bring about as many MPs together on that issue. When it comes to the 2-child benefit cap, the SNP are looking at trying to amend the King's Speech. I think these things will be very successful if they focus on single issues.
Is there any? I agree, and I think that's probably going to be the most effective way for them to do it. Is there any mention in all of this about the Liberal Democrats? Because
Well,
they
yeah. I mean, I was gonna bring them up.
only because I mean they've got what 72 MPs now. I mean they are the power force that the SNP were
Yeah.
previously more so, and certainly in this election, I mean their manifesto was more left wing than the Labour Party one. And it'd be interesting to see whether sort of there's any sort of alliances formed with them too, because actually, if Corbyn can get the Liberal Democrats on side as well, and I'm sure they'll be a bit more like, well, it depends on the issue, but if they're going to focus on single issues, if they can get the Lib Dems on side for a number of those, I think that will be a force.
I think
I agree
the
with you on
Lib
that
Dems do
one.
need to be careful, though. You know, if you look at the constituencies that they've taken a lot of former Tory constituencies. The voters that they've got for. One thing that hasn't been mentioned today is the Gale strategy. If everybody read about the Gale strategy, where the Lib Dems essentially, apparently, are targeted seats which have a Gale's bakery in them, to target seats, because the Gale's bakery signifies a certain type of group of potentially younger / maybe bordering conservative but still quite progressive young people, and they targeted those seats. But the reason why I bring that up is that are those the people who are going to want to be aligned with Jeremy Corbyn?
But then 50% of the Green MPs came from Conservative seats. You know, to two of them, Adrian and Ellie, both their seats were previously Conservative.
It's less of a risk for them, though, with 4 seats versus the the Lib Dems 70.
Well, look, I mean, I suppose with the Liberal Democrats, right? They stood on a manifesto which you pointed out was more left wing than Labour, right? They stood on scrapping the 2-child benefit cap. They stood on building 150,000 council homes a year. I think absolutely the left needs to work with the Liberal Democrats on policies such that, even just on that, because that's such a good policy, and the fact that the Labour Party won't even talk about council houses. Now, some centrists, Labour client journalists are trying to say, oh no, they believe in social housing. But if you talk about social housing, which is just housing associations, which is still funded through the private realm, that's not real state-funded council houses, and that's something that needs to happen. And I think it doesn't matter whether you're a Conservative voter or not. People are united when it comes to a lot of the domestic policies of Jeremy Corbyn. To add in a caveat, though, what Lewis, you were saying, unfortunately, policies and support for politicians and parties don't correlate, which I think is an issue with our media. So even if there's a lot of people who voted for the Lib Dems, they actually even liked the policies and the manifesto, but hates Jeremy Corbyn and see there's some kind of pact there, I could see that could turn them off. But again, there shouldn't be some like official pact. If it's done on a policy basis, I think can only be a good thing, at least for the next 5 years. Because at the end of the day, it's going to be I think it's going to be 2 terms of a Labour government. There are 72 Lib Dems, there are 4 Green MPs, there are 5 independent left-wing MPs, and of course there are, let's say, 4 or 5 progressive SNP MPs too. Then they could really potentially push on a single issue like council housing, for example.
Yeah, if I may as well, obviously one person I don't know if we've mentioned yet is Carla Denyer. So if we're thinking about history and politics and Jeremy Corbyn turning off voters, and obviously Ed Davies still got, the past of the post office, he's heading for an inquiry soon. I wouldn't necessarily exactly put him on the left.
Yeah.
Then we're talking about the SNP. Stephen Flynn has still got a great voice, but he is obviously tarnished in a way because his voice is mostly for Scotland. So who comes forward from this? It could be Carla Denyer. She doesn't have people don't know her before the election. She's fresh. She's untarnished by Parliament. Perhaps she could be the front runner of the left-leaning alliance. She's ready for it.
It'll work in the Greens' favour for the next election as well. So
yeah.
From a political standpoint, it kind of makes sense. Although that said, something that the Greens have had to deal with quite prominently certainly over the election period is the smearing that we saw happen under Jeremy Corbyn, in 2017 and 2019, and a lot of that has come from the fact that the Green Party is filled with people like me who joined the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn and then left when Keir Starmer took over.
I don't think that's going to be as big of an issue now, because more and more people are waking up to the smears. I mean, given what we've seen happen in Gaza, that people aren't even listening to these smears that
No.
the Greens are
But
anti-Semitic now?
But I do wonder if Carla sort of, if she gets too close with Corbyn in the sense of political alliances and things, there's always that potential that it runs the risk of sort of more bombardment from media. Although I'm saying all this as if the Green Party aren't completely ignored by the media 95% of the time.
I think
anyway.
that's actually a bigger issue. I'd rather
know.
see political attacks against the Greens than them being ignored.
Yeah, at least
because
they're
them
talking
being
about us
ignored is
then.
far more dangerous because
Yeah.
they're not getting their political views heard.
Yeah.
But the idea that Carla Denyu could be this sort of leading figure of the left, I think would be excellent. I don't know if it's going to be likely or not, but I think that would be good as well. But look, I mean, let's move on because we could be talking about this for hours and we will be talking about it for years to come, actually. But I want to focus our attention to focusing our attention to the US. On Saturday in Pennsylvania, an assassination attempt was made on former President Donald Trump whilst he wasn't hurt, apart from a graze in the ear, which some believe may have been shrapnel, not a bullet. Unfortunately, a supporter was killed.
I see something that said, take a look at what happened. Oh.
Move his spear. Hold. When you're ready. On you. Ready. Move. Up. Move. Go. Hawkeye's here. Hawkeye's here. Move it to the spear. Spear, get ready. Spear, get ready. We ready? Shooters down. Shooters down. Are we good? Shooters down. Are we good to move? Shooters down. We're good to move. We're clear. Let's move. Let's move. We're clear. Let me get my shoes. I got you, sir. Let me get my shoes, sir.
Hold that in your head. It's bloody.
So we gotta move to the bus. Let me get my shoes.
Okay. Watch out.
Wait.
Now, this has sparked a huge debate on safety. Unfortunately, the loudest voices have been from the right, decrying political violence from the left, despite the fact that the suspect was a registered Republican. Now, Adam Brooks, who is a contributor to GB News, wrote these two tweets. The violent left yet again reared its ugly head tonight. I hope Donald Trump is okay and fully recovers. My thoughts go out to the innocent victim and their family too. When many lefty commentators and media figures called for Trump to be hurt, they roused the extreme left. Scum! The same people that laugh at milkshake attacks on Farage or laugh at vile remarks made by Labour MPs support this direction of travel towards political violence. If a Labour MP was attacked, the last thing I'd do is mock or make fun. I'd be calling it out, like I've recently with Green protesters at Starmer's house. Now, there are many decrying the left, essentially blaming them for what has happened. And it's gone as far as a Republican representative, Lauren Boebert, going on national TV and saying that Biden is responsible.
I believe that much of the rhetoric from the left has escalated to this moment. Just last week, we saw Joe Biden trying to excuse his poor performance at the debate and get that behind him and say, now we need to put Trump in a bullseye. President Trump was literally put in a bullseye after the president of the United States, the sitting president of the United States, called for him to be put in a bullseye.
I'd like to clarify what you just said. Do you believe that President Joe Biden bears any responsibility for what happened today, or does the responsibility for the shooting lie with the shooter?
I do believe that Joe Biden is responsible for the shooting today. Kyle Clark, an innocent supporter of President Trump, someone who loved President Trump and was there exercising their right to support him, lost their life today. Everyone who has called him a fascist, everyone who has called him a threat to democracy, who said that he should be put in a bullseye, as Joe Biden said, they need to have some very deep reflection tonight before another tragedy like this takes place.
Now, as that video was playing, we just got news that Donald Trump has officially been nominated as the Republican nominee. No surprise there. But we're going to break down everything, including the fallout and what's to come. But firstly, Turn Left's own Lewis Aaron spoke to Roor Rota, who produces social media political content and covers US politics. We have a clip from the interview.
Hunter, thank you for joining us. I just want to get your initial reaction to the clip of Trump's attempted assassination. What did you think when you first saw it?
Well, I thought it was going to be a very, very bad outcome. To be honest, regardless of what happened, whoever did it, any of these things was highly irrelevant in my mind. The main thing was, how is this going to be instrumentalized by Trump and his world to push further political violence? And in the, 48 hours since, we've seen leading Republicans, Congress people, senators, lieutenant governors, all calling for direct violence against Democratic politicians, supporters, the left generally. Like, it's exactly what I feared.
Yeah, I saw like JD Vance like pushing this idea that Biden specifically incited this by what was the quote? It was "We've got to put Trump in a bullseye," which was completely taken out of context. He was on a phone call with donors. He wasn't, at a rally like Trump often is, screaming things. I don't buy this idea. I saw one congressman from Georgia, I can't remember his name, Mike something, also say that the district attorney should be immediately filing charges for the incitement of an assassination against Trump, which is just ridiculous. But do you think that this situation has won Trump the election?
Well, I think anyone who says they know what's going to happen doesn't know what they're talking about, because unfortunately, like with most things in the Trump era, everything is an unprecedented situation, and any historical reference we make is from far before social media and the communications infrastructure we have right now. So I could tell you historically that, yeah, US presidential candidates have gotten shot before and it hasn't really helped or hurt their situation, unless they died, of course. But more importantly, yeah, it could cause something to change. But at the same time, how many more people are going to vote for Donald Trump that weren't already going to vote for Donald Trump at this point? There's not that many people left who are undecided on literally Donald Trump. And that's, I think, the big issue. It's like there's not much vote left for him to advance into. So it's like, do I think it will cause higher turnout among Republicans? Do I think it'll make his supporters incredibly more vehemently into him? Of course. I mean, obviously. And I think that's the big thing, right? This election is not about who is the most popular, because we're talking about a situation where we're going to have like 60% turnout. So it's just about who can get the most people out there and who can have the most enthusiasm. And him, the photo, all the stuff around this, it's helping create a mythology, which is all that Trumpism is. It's a mythology around the giant orange.
Do you buy into this idea that, this was incited not just by Biden and the bullseye quote, but perhaps the rhetoric that people use against Trump, the idea that he's a fascist or fascist light, that people will often compare him to Hitler or Nazis?
I mean, these are the crocodiliest crocodile tears ever, to be totally honest. These are people that have been calling for violence almost every single day and are continuing to call for violence after the assassination attempt. And I think we also have to go back to the reality of the situation. From what we know of right now, we have a 20-year-old who is a registered Republican who had a very, very light social media presence, and most of what we understand is speculation, very wild speculation on the first part. And also, from what we know now, it just seems like he was kind of a very normal loner kind of kid who was into vaguely conservative politics. And this speaks a lot more to what unfortunately we see a lot in the US, which is the same kind of people who end up doing school shootings and stuff. And that could be all it is. So there's this real material thing happening that whatever the motives of the shooter and whatnot, whatever inspired them. But it doesn't seem like they're deep into like anti-Trump democratic world to even make these accusations, even past like the most briefest sniff test. And if we kind of look at the broader American media circuit, it has once again in this cycle been highly beneficial to Trump. And it's not like people have been hard against him. Saying Trump is a threat to democracy is just stating a fact about reality. It is not saying something demeaning or demonization of Trump. If Trump wanted to not be called a threat to democracy, he could stop threatening democracy. It's that simple.
Yeah, everything from obviously the very obvious trying to overturn the election, from truthing out. I hate using that expression, truthing out. That he said it would be fair to potentially overturn the Constitution, or was it suspend? I can't remember the exact wording that he used. He's a constant threat to democracy. He is, and it's objectively true. I don't think if you want to criticize the Democrats in any way, which you can, I don't think we can call them a threat to democracy when it's so clear that Trump actually is. And as well, like with the idea of like inciting violence, it's Trump who's got, again, the long history. I just earlier was watching the clip of him taking the mickey out of Paul Pelosi, Nancy Pelosi's husband, after he was bludgeoned with a hammer after a guy broke into their home looking for Nancy Pelosi with zip ties, who just got sentenced to, I think, 30 years. And then in a speech, he was like, oh, how's her husband? Oh, she should have built a wall around her house, laughing at this idea that a politician's home got broken into and possibly could have been murdered.
No, CNN canceled, MSNBC canceled several of its morning talk news shows. So like all the commentary shows, because they were worried about offending Trump supporters. Like the deference paid to Donald Trump is on such an extreme level. Joe Biden has stopped his advertising spend in the middle of a presidential campaign. Donald Trump has not. He is campaigning and fundraising off of his own assassination attempt. So like the idea that Trump is never paid the respect or given this kind of huge space to do anything, or all the value or all the benefit of the doubt by the news media is just fabrication. It's just not true. Like currently right now, major news networks are not discussing this because they're worried about offending Trumpists. Like that's the real thing that's going on right now. And it's wild to think about.
Well, I'll thank you for.
No, that was Lewis Aaron with Roor Rota. Really interesting discussion they had. The full interview will be available soon. We are going to discuss what these two have talked about and a lot of other things. But there is a lot of misinformation out there. I mean, some who purposely peddle lies in order to create a narrative that fits. And that is what has been going on. That's what's going to continue to happen. There are false social media accounts using images of someone who wasn't even the shooter, making it out that they are left-wing. Hate Trump, gay, Jewish BLM. Obviously, the person who made it sounds like a Nazi. You'll see another one saying hashtag Biden, hashtag Patriot. Look, the motives are still not fully understood. The facts are, what we have right now, is that he was a registered Republican. 4 years ago, he gave $15 to a progressive PAC. The donation to the PAC was in 2021, and then he became a Republican in 2022. He's a big gun lover. The day of the assassination attempt, he was wearing a t-shirt of a pro-gun YouTuber. Now, of course, the politics of the person seems kind of incoherent. It's possible that he started his journey maybe on the left, the center left, whatever, and then over time got sucked into online conspiracies and ended up on the far right. I mean, that does happen quite a lot, especially with young men. A good example is Jackson Hinkle. Jackson Hinkle was a Bernie bro. And over the last few years, he's become a Putin supporter, Russian apologist. He's a campist. He's been schmoozing with the far right. So it does happen. But let's open up to the panel. Now, I want to start off with, quite frankly, deranged takes from that the left is uniquely violent. We have a sitting representative saying that Biden is responsible. I mean, this is simply not true. Okay, the left isn't uniquely violent. In fact, when looking at the numbers in the US, the far right are the most likely perpetrators of it. Callum, I'll go to you first. How dangerous is it that people are smearing an entire political faction is violent and even going as far as holding Biden and the Democrats, who aren't left wing, by the way, responsible?
It's very dangerous, and it's frankly deranged. I mean, the irony cannot be lost on anyone that Donald Trump has been facing charges over inciting a violent attack on the Capitol on January the 6th. Like, he himself has been responsible for some of the most, some of the biggest form of political violence that we've seen in America in quite a while. And he's responsible for that. So for people to somehow try and spin it around and argue that, oh, well, Biden's responsible or somebody else is responsible, it's just frankly nonsense, and it is dangerous. My initial reaction when I saw the Biden bullseye comments, excuse me, when I first saw that, I only saw the comment. I didn't see it in the full context. And my initial reaction at the time was, well, to be fair, if Trump had said that and the assassination attempt had been on Biden, I'd be here saying that Trump had to bear some responsibility for his rhetoric. But I'd not seen it in its full context. Having now seen it in the full context of what was said prior to it, it's a turn of phrase. It's not, he was talking about turning the attention away from one thing to Trump and, turning the attention in terms of the debate and the campaign. And yeah, I think it's just madness that people are using that. What makes me, it doesn't make me laugh because it's terrifying, but what sort of, I've noticed as well is that we now know, as you've said, that the shooter was a registered Republican. Okay, he's donated to some, Democrat causes in the past, whatever, but he's a registered Republican. He seems to be pro-guns. And even with that information, Joe Biden and the Democrats are somehow to blame. Like, it makes no sense. Honestly, I mean, I don't know what his motive was, and I'm sure we'll find out in days or weeks to come. But it seems to me like we've had a situation where we've had a probably, unwell individual, as is often the case in America, who's just thought, you know what, fuck it, I'm gonna try and assassinate Donald Trump for whatever reason. But you know what? It doesn't matter. He is responsible for the actions that he took, right? If it transpires that he's written an essay somewhere saying, oh, I saw Joe Biden's comments and he really that really inspired me to go and attack Donald Trump, then all right, maybe there is an argument to be had, and maybe that's a conversation that can be had at that time. But based on the facts as we know them at the moment, I've seen no evidence at all to suggest that this individual has somehow been incited by the left, by the Democrats, by Biden, or anyone involved with that campaign. And actually, we see very often in America young men taking guns, going to public places and killing people. And Donald Trump and his party fully and actively support the laws that allow these individuals to keep doing these things. So we need to also look at that. If Donald Trump had been harsher on gun crime and he'd actually done something to try and curb it when he was in power, then there's every possibility that this wouldn't have happened. I would like to say, though, that I do think it is important that, without wanting to sound like I'm just parroting basically every world leader and every politician that's commented on this, it is important to say that, obviously, I don't condone political violence. I do think the comparisons to Farage being milkshaked are a little bit disingenuous. Donald Trump could have died the other day. By about that much. If his head had been that much more, to the right, he would be dead. So the people that are trying to compare somebody having a drink thrown over them to somebody almost losing their life, I think need to just give their head a wobble and actually look at the seriousness of what happened the other day. I'm grateful that Trump wasn't assassinated. I think the fallout both in America and globally from that would have been huge and would have been extremely terrible. But I think that when it comes to the comments being made and the blame being shifted, I think as people say, those in glass houses shouldn't throw stones, and I think that's what we're seeing a lot at the moment.
I mean, Lewis, before we talk about the political fallout, which is going to be another interesting conversation, I want to get your view on what the people in this country, not just America, have been saying, that this is political violence on the left. I mean, I brought up some tweets from Adam Brooks. You can find Darren Grimes say that the left are far more violent than the right. And then you've got elected representatives like Bobert saying the blame is pretty much on Biden. I want to get your response to that.
It's just absolutely ridiculous. You already brought up the perfect point towards the beginning. I think it's the FBI who compile the list of like terrorists and suspected terrorists and the people that they're, most cautious of in a particular country. And it is still like white, often middle-aged, but not always middle-aged, white men who actually pose the most danger domestically to most Western white European countries. If you go off and look at the list of on the UK terrorist organization, the name of their organization is slipping past my lips right now. You can actually go on there and see every person arrested over the last few years, and it's mostly white men. But of course, when somebody commits a terrorist act, it's a person with non-white skin, that'll be on front of the Daily Mail. So we have this perception that domestic terrorism, is fueled by others, when actual fact all the data in America and in the UK shows actually it's mostly white men. Moving on with that, it's really frustrating as well to see political pundits in the UK using this as an idea of like the dangerous left. There is no consistent evidence at all that the left in general pose any danger, that people are radicalized by the left in any dangerous way. Of course, there are isolated cases, but most cases of any form of terrorism enhanced by any form of political radicalization, more often than not, majority of the time, comes from the right. They've created this world where they constantly like to appear under attack, and anything that will reinforce that is only going to continue fueling them. They probably loved that this happened because they can just, again, make a little segment out of it and continue their culture war of the dangerous left.
I mean, there are people, I think it's true, there are people who wanted this to be a lefty. They were hoping it's probably a person of color from a minority. I mean, you saw those accounts earlier. We don't know who made the accounts, but I don't think it will be out of the realm of this universe to suggest maybe it was a far right or Trump supporter that made these fake accounts pretending that the shooter was a Biden supporter or left wing, just to push this narrative that the left are violent. And look, there's a reason why they want to push this narrative, is so that they can clamp down on the left, isn't it? They're not doing it just to say, "Oh, woe is me," even that's part of it. There's a reason why it's very good for these people to say that the left are more violent, is so it gives them an excuse to clamp down on the left even more.
Yeah, I was following this very, very closely on Twitter/X. I hate that. Very as soon as it happened, and I was online.
I mean, here at Side Left, we say Twitter, by the way. So,
I was following it very closely, and within 20 minutes, there was a post going around. Literally had millions of views of some guy, some like middle-aged, kind of whitish-looking, bulky bloke, and it was saying, "This is his name." I can't remember what the made-up name was, and it's like, it's been confirmed. This is the shooter, and he's Antifa. When in actual fact, the shooter was still dead on the rooftop, and no one's identified him. And they were just people were so quick to accept that this was the shooter. He was a member of Antifa, and it had millions of shares, millions of likes, millions of views.
I mean, Lawrence Fox even said, I mean, he shared one of those fake social media accounts and it had Antifa in it, of course, right? And he's like, Antifa is a terrorist organization.
The post I'm talking about specifically, the picture of a guy turned out to be an Italian football journalist. Now, if I could, I would like to know just how that came to be, where some person out there was like, I'm going to take this random photo of an Italian football journalist and say, this is the shooter, he's Antifa. I don't know how these things are created, but we live in a weird world.
People know that people know if they put a tweet out immediately after something like that's happened, that they'll get a load of engagement on their account. And I think that's what it boils down to. Something that I wanted to mention, though, that I've noticed from this, and I'm glad that we showed the video again earlier, because with the video with that particular audio as well, because if I was an American taxpayer right now, I'd be asking for my money back, because presidents and former presidents get paid for Secret Service protection, right? And what we saw in that video was utter contempt from Donald Trump for those who are there to protect him. They dive on top of him after the shots are fired. He immediately, once they declare that they're free, that it's safe to get him up, they say to him, "We need to get you into the car." And it's like, "Stop! I want my shoes. I want my shoes. Let me put my shoes on." Moaning about it. He's just been shot, and he's there like, "Oh, let me get my shoes on." Then he asks them to wait while he puts his fist in the air to have that big heroic moment. And to be fair, the photographer at the New York Times that took that picture, I mean, credit to him, because it's a cracker of a photograph. That's the one. I mean, if that doesn't win some awards this year, then I don't know what will. But it's also going to help Trump significantly. But he's doing all this while his security team are trying to get him to safety. Okay, shooters down, but they don't know if there's anyone else on another roof with a gun. You can see them. He's trying to put his head up, and they're there trying to stop him. And he's there just like, wait. And then he's there like, fight, or whatever he's saying. And that,
I guess anyone would
doing that.
Do you not think that anyone would do that though? I mean, I'm not saying this is. I'm supporting that he did that. I mean, I think
I wouldn't. If I'd just been shot, I'd want to get out of there as soon as possible.
Well,
So I want to touch on this actually, because
sorry, just really quickly, Liz, but just also on that point though, fundamentally, it is the job of the Secret Service to keep him safe.
Yeah.
And if the Secret Service say to you, "Get in the car," you listen to them, because if you don't listen to them, they might all be dead. And these people are putting their lives on the line, to protect Trump, as is their job. And they're being paid for by the taxpayers. And Trump's just like, "Oh, fuck you. I need to have this big heroic."
Yeah,
moment.
that's a good
Sorry,
point.
Lewis.
He's essentially, there could have been another shooter or whatever, or you don't need the shooters down. And he wants to posture. He wants to make a political statement over the safety of those agents, right? I mean, those agents do risk their lives, and Trump thought that his first thought was, "I need to make a fist bump,
exactly,
and make a photo that because he knew this would be good for his campaign." And I think you are right, of course. On that.
Sorry, Lewis.
No, it's all right. I think as well, I have been following US politics very, very closely, probably to an unhealthy level, ever since Trump got into power, because I found the whole thing extremely fascinating. But one thing that's come out consistently, one after the other, is that every time somebody leaves his circle, the administration ended, people have wrote a book, they've done an interview, and the one thing that's quite consistent that they've said is Donald Trump is so scared of looking weak. So I feel like this idea of the photo, which we're just going to put up again just one more time, this idea that this photo is a person who is showing strength, showing courage. He's obviously thinking about the moment and how it would look on camera. I don't think it comes from a place of strength. I think it comes from a genuine place of insecurity and weakness, that he could not leave that stage without having to look strong, because he's essentially scared of being seen as weak. And that's been very consistent from his aunt, who's wrote a book about him, who's a psychologist, to everybody who has left his inner circle have all said the same thing. He is scared of being weak.
I want to go back to
sorry,
just to cut off. I want to go back a bit, because there's so much to discuss here, and we will get into speculation and we will get into the fallout. But the original point we were talking about is the sort of the media narrative and who's violent or not.
Easy to get carried away.
and in that interview, Lewis, you did just then with Roor Rota, I mean, he brought up a point that MSNBC didn't want to offend Trump supporters by having someone on there to sort of poo-poo on the idea that maybe it wasn't a lefty. And I think this is now coming to the UK, and you've got look, the facts are, look at the political violence in this country. For example, Owen Jones was beaten up by a bunch of far-right thugs. Aaron Bastani was punched by someone, I don't exactly know who it was, but he was a lefty, a prominent lefty, who was being attacked. You had Joe Cox murdered by a Britain First supporter, a far-right nationalist. You had David Amess, who, by the way, the GB News lot and the right-wingers will try and paint Islamists as left-wing. They'll say, well, it's that was left-wing violence. No, it wasn't. Okay, the David Amess was killed by an extreme Islamist. Okay, a ultra-conservative. That is still right-wing violence, because religious doctrine, okay, whether it's Christianity, whether it's Islam, goes against pretty much every left-wing principle. It's ultra-conservatism. That's what it is. So if someone follows that, all right, and then enacts political violence, that is still right-wing violence. Of course, the left defends people. We defend Muslims from smears and political attacks who try and say that all Muslims are terrorists and stuff. That's because we seem to give a shit about people. But that doesn't mean that those of us on the left who are obviously social progressives, who are secular, who are probably most of us are either agnostic or atheist, suddenly support the religious doctrines of Islam and Christianity? No. So I think that's really important to point out, that the only people who have been killed, sitting MPs have been killed, have been from the right wing. That's important to point out. And the only really political violence you see from the left is orange
Milkshakes.
paint that can be milkshakes and orange paint that can be washed away. I mean, it was even funny when Anna Brooks in that tweet saying, well, if it was a Labour MP who was being attacked, I'll call it out. Like I called out those activists who went outside Starmer's house. I'm like, these two things are not the same. Shooting at a president to kill him is still far removed from a couple of climate activists going outside of Starmer's house. Even if you disagree with it, even if you think you should leave Starmer's house alone, that's the extent of political violence you essentially see from the left. And that's not to say that people don't kill in the name of the left. I mean, there was, I can't remember, the details escape me, but there was one person who was a communist who talked about potentially enacting political violence, but that is as far as it's ever gone. But no one's been killed in the last 30 years in the name of socialism or communism.
Do you remember that clip from, I think it was a few weeks ago, Owen Jones, where he was just speaking to reform voters and he walked up to that one guy and he said something
Yes.
along the lines of, I can't remember if he said just shoot them or shoot the boats. That is political violence. And the fact that he said that so casually, and yes, it's only one guy, that is rhetoric I've heard lots. I've spoken to hundreds of reform voters over the last few months. And I've heard that a few times, only a few times, not every reform voter, of course, but the fact that it's more commonplace and the fact that in Owen's clip, he says it so casually, it already tells us we're in a potentially pre-political violence climate where some people are primed for it, some people are prepped for it.
But you also can't separate political ideology with political violence. I mean, let's brass tacks, as I like to say, let's just be fucking real here for a second. What is it about right-wing political ideology, especially the fringes of it? It's fascism. It's about division. It's literally about hating others. We see where the logical endpoint, or we see the endpoint of the right-wing ideology, Nazi Germany. That's them enacting an ideology. Now, think of the radical left. What is it? It's about fucking equality. It's about supporting people regardless of what you look like, where you come from, your gender, for example. So you can't separate these two things. Again, it doesn't mean that you cannot be violent if you're on the left. I mean, there has been violence from the left, but if you want to, people seem to try and divorce these ideas between political violence. And again, if your entire worldview is based on hating someone for their skin color, or they're Jewish, or if they're an immigrant, or if they're trans, then of course more violence is going to come out of that. And that's a discussion no one seems to have, especially the mainstream media, which is why my personal opinion is I don't think it's possible to have more left-wing violence, because the ideas behind it, left wing is being egalitarian, whether you don't agree with it or not, but that is what its foundation is. And extreme right wing politics is fascism.
But also again, I mean, in the case of what happened with Trump, I think a lot of this it's just rhetoric, because to try and like help their cause, because there's not even like there isn't any truth to it. Like this guy was not a left winger, even if it turns out that he was a Democrat, which he wasn't by all accounts. He was a registered Republican. But even if he was a Democrat, he's not a left winger. The Democrats aren't left wing, not remotely. So this idea that the left is somehow to blame, or as Nigel Farage said, you know, the media is somehow to blame, because obviously it's the left wing media, even though they're definitely right wing. But you know, like this idea that it's somehow the fault of the left, even though the shooter was Republican, the reason that he had access to a gun was because of right-wing views. I mean, the left would have banned, he wouldn't have been able to get a gun if the left had been in charge, and actually, you know, been able to implement laws they wanted to implement. And I read something the other day about that wasn't one of the first laws that Trump changed, something to do with access to firearms for people with mental health conditions as well. It made it easier for, I don't know the details on it, but I read that he made it easier for people that were suffering with the mental health to be able to still access firearms. But it's not even relevant to what's happened. So how can they make it into this argument that they're clearly using?
I think
How can they even do it?
What's important to know when it comes to tying in what you're both saying, Curtis, about like ideology and political violence. If you look at the field across America and the UK in terms of like the media field and the fringe media field, there is no equivalent to a Tucker Carlson on the left. There is no equivalent to Alex Jones. There is no equivalent to a Donald Trump. There is no equivalent to a Lauren Boebert. There is no equivalent to a Margie Taylor Greene. There is no equivalent to a left-wing Nigel Farage. They don't exist to those levels of the extreme on the left. This only mostly exists on the right. A lot of them also monetize it as well, which is worth noting as well. It can only exist in the current right-wing ecosphere. It's very frustrating, and they continue to monetize it, continue to scream for it, and continue to cause harm.
But it's also another example of the political right projecting. They're saying, "Oh my God, the left wing are so violent," but look at the statements, and you just point out a handful of people, and there's no left wing alternative to them, or a mirror version of the left from them, right? But look at the statements you see from the right wing. Look at how they called Jeremy Corbyn a terrorist sympathiser, right?
Oh.
And then there was a Finsbury Park terrorist attack in which Jeremy Corbyn was the target of an assassination. Do you not think that calling Jeremy Corbyn a terrorist sympathiser is going to increase violence? Of course it does. The newspapers say that. The right-wing politicians say it. Tories say that. I mean, they were saying that with Keir Starmer. Again, I severely disagree with Keir Starmer, but the idea that I think that Keir Starmer is a terrorist sympathiser, unless we're talking about Israel, then I don't think that's true. But the political right will do that, and you got pundits on GB News who will say stuff like, these people are traitors. You see it in America. That Biden is a traitor, Obama is a traitor, and they hate this country. That is extreme rhetoric. You don't really see that from the left at all. I mean, in fact, the left are often too weak. Sometimes I wish they were a bit more aggressive in their rhetoric. They're almost too scared to accept people.
I don't know, though. I mean, just to sort of play devil's advocate a bit with this, it's in relation to the Trump situation. I mean, we've referred to Trump as fascist. We've referred to Trump, I mean, in the interview that Lewis did with Hunter earlier on, we talked about the references that people make to him being like the Nazis and to Hitler. I mean, there is, particularly when it comes to figures like Donald Trump, there has often been a lot of rhetoric towards him from the left, comparing him to these really horrible, extreme right-wing dictators who are responsible for the deaths of millions of people. I do have to wonder if we have to maybe at least acknowledge that, because if it's incitement and it's partly to blame to call Corbyn a terrorist sympathiser when he clearly isn't. But if that then leads to an attack on his life, then is there not something to be had in, if the left are saying Donald Trump's an extreme right-wing fascist that's going to be responsible for the deaths of trans people, and even if what we're saying is provably true.
Well, that was the thing. I'm glad you made that point. I think it's important to bring up, because there will be a lot of people probably watching saying, well, a lot of the rhetoric around Donald Trump. The reason why I want to push back on that is for a few reasons. One is because how prevalent it is. Okay. People like us might be saying it from the sideline, but where's our platform compared to the mainstream media, right? When you have billionaire newspapers, when you have corporate media echoing a certain sentiment, platforming Republican politicians, compared to a couple of people on Twitter saying it, I don't think is equal. Secondly, I don't think calling someone a fascist for doing fascist things is just correct. Saying that this policy will kill trans people might be quite, I don't know, very, very crass if people want to say that. But if it's factually correct, then you should say that. But what we see is from the right lies and say stuff like they hate you, or again, terrorist sympathizer. I mean, these are things that are quite, one, that are not based in reality at all, but these are things that are propped up by a far bigger mouthpiece than the left. I mean, the left don't really, this is what we're doing. Turn Left is an independent media with a small audience, but you compare it to the newspapers. And to kind of tie this into the end of it, right? You've got newspapers every single day attacking marginalized communities, attacking Muslims, attacking people on benefits, attacking refugees and immigrants. That happens every single day. And yet no one really points out the hypocrisy here.
Yeah.
I mean, Lewis, I want to bring, to be fair, I mean, we have spoken for a bit. Lewis, I do want to bring you in here Maybe if you even agree with Callum's point, what he said there.
No, I'm more on your side. I think it's really poignant to point out that there's a very big difference to say Trump is Hitler than here is something Trump is doing which emulates things that Hitler did. They're two very different things, and I think we just need to be careful with our rhetoric. I think it's unfair, and it'd be wrong to say Trump is like Hitler.
And a lot of us don't say that as well.
Exactly, yes. But I think that's what the right make us out to look like.
Yeah,
don't they?
sure.
That's what they say. They say we say these things, but most people don't. They will say, here is how Jewish people were demonized by Nazi Germany in the 1930s, right? And then we'll say, here is how immigrants are being demonized. And we'll say, this is what Hitler did. This is what Nazis did. And then people will say, oh, so you're calling him Hitler? And it's like, no, we have an education for a purpose. We're supposed to learn from history, learn from the past, learn what happened, and watch out for the steps of it. So yes, if somebody's going to demonize a group of people to scapegoat, and we're going to point that out, that this is what the famous fascists did, then of course we have to continue to make that comparison.
Sorry, I just want to quick jump in before you make that point, and it's quite important that the way we express our political views is also important, and the left does it very different to the right. The right will say stuff like, and in this country, that people who support the queer community, the trans right activists, whatever, they want to brutalize kids, they want to chop off their limbs. That is very different to when we say, like, well, George Osborne instituted austerity in which 330,000 people were killed. That we are talking about a policy. We're saying a politician enacted this policy and these are the effects from that policy, whereas the right will say this person hates you, wants you to die, wants you to suffer. And I think that's a very big difference between the left and the right. I don't necessarily go around and say George Osborne wants to see babies die, or he wants to watch babies starve to death because he's supporting austerity. Very seldom do you really hear that, especially from more prominent left-wing commentators. You'll hear, well, George Osborne instituted austerity and it killed X amount of people.
And actually, we saw that.
Evidence, but the right don't do that. Like I said, when it comes to, especially when it comes to talking about trans people, the disgusting rhetoric that comes from transphobes is like they want to brutalize children, and it's insane.
And actually, we saw that in action in the UK when the Labour Party ran that smear campaign against Rishi Sunak.
Yes,
saying that he wanted. Well, I can't remember the exact what topic it was about, but.
Well, it was about Rishi Sunak. They said that he wanted to release child pedophiles. He said he's on the side of pedophiles because and it was the left, including myself and many on the left, who said this is disgusting.
Who said it was wrong? Exactly.
Yes.
So Labour run this campaign, and it was the left that said no, we can't do this. This isn't okay. And actually, going back to what we were saying earlier, I mean, I do agree with you both. By the way, I was just throwing that in there for some some devil's advocate. But the other thing, just to what we were saying earlier about how the left respond to things as well. I mean, look at the response from the left to Donald Trump's attempted assassination, right? You've got people like, Nancy Pelosi, obviously the president, Joe Biden. You've got other world leaders, but also left-wing commentators and political pundits coming out and saying, like, hope is okay. Like, we don't want him to die. Like, that's not how we deal with political opponents. Like, hope is okay, thoughts and prayers, whatever. But they're coming out and they're at least offering some form of support, and they're offering, they're at least saying, look, we hope that he is okay as a minimum. Whereas when, like Lewis, like what you discussed earlier on, what happened with Nancy Pelosi and her husband, Trump's reaction to that and the reaction from Trump supporters to that was to mock it and to make a joke out about it and to talk about dressing up as as the attacker for Halloween, and grossly just really vile, disgusting things, reactions to a really, really serious issue when the tables were turned and it was somebody on the left that was being attacked. But when the attack takes place against somebody on the right, the left are often the first that come together to say, look, it's not okay to shoot our political opponents. Like, we hope he's all right. And the right don't do that.
I mean, there was an incident. I don't know if, Lewis, because you are far more clued up on American politics, you might even know what I'm talking about. But if not, I can't remember the details. But I remember watching this, and it was I think it was either a Democrat politician or a Democrat activist, right? And he was killed in the street. and I think he was killed by an immigrant, right? And the response from Republicans and right wingers were like, he kind of got what he deserved. I mean, there's a guy who's speaking up for immigrants, and an immigrant kills him, rather than say this is absolutely deplorable and disgusting. And I think that was a very good example of how what the response is. I mean, we've seen so many countless examples that we've already brought up today on the rhetoric from the right. But Lewis, now you come in.
Yeah, I don't remember the finer details of that specific case, but you're actually getting onto what I wanted to bring up about the normalization. It's not just about political violence itself, it's about normalizing it. So we have, January 6th, very famous moment. I think we had a few hundred people who've now been sentenced to jail from that. Trump has now called them freedom fighters, and he said he's going to pardon them when he becomes president. So people who violently stormed the Capitol on January 6th, which resulted in the death of, I think it was 2 people in the first 24 hours. And one fact that people often forget is I think around 5 or 6 Capitol police officers actually ended their life within a year of that happening, who were there on the day. So I can put those deaths on Trump's head too. That those people are now going to be released, and they're called freedom fighters. On top of that, there's other instances where Trump said that he wanted to build a pit around certain parts of the wall and put snakes in it, and then also shoot migrants in the feet to slow them down. We had the other famous moment where he was in a debate with Biden in 2020, where he was asked to denounce white supremacy, and they asked him to denounce the Proud Boys, and his response was, "Oh, Proud Boys, stand back and stand by," which was the most bizarre statement that ever came out of debate, which within literally in a minute, the leader of the Proud Boys tweeted out saying like orders accepted or something along those lines. Like he literally took it as a rallying call. So they've normalized political violence, and in actual fact, they're going to release people who've been politically violent as soon as Trump comes into power. And well, if he does come into power.
Well, just with you mentioning that, if he does come into power, I mean, what do you both think is going to happen next in terms of fallout? Because my initial reaction was, well, he's won the election now. If he hadn't already, that image has won him the election. But then, with a day or so to think about it, and listening to Roor Rota earlier on as well in the interview, saying that actually not a lot has changed. The people that were going to vote for Trump are still going to vote for Trump. The people that weren't probably aren't. I am now sort of wondering whether this specific event, I mean, I think Trump's probably going to win, but I think Trump's probably going to win partly because Biden is just falling apart completely at the moment. But will this have any sway on the election results? And given Trump said he's going to be a dictator if he gets into power from day one, because he's got personal scores to settle for all the really, really nasty, mean legal cases that have been taken against him because he was a naughty boy when he was in charge last time. Will this have an effect on what happens next, or will it just be business and fear as usual?
Well, it's worth quickly noting that just a few hours ago, one of those cases was dropped against Donald Trump. Just to quickly throw that in there. By the way, the judge who dropped the case was handpicked by Donald Trump just a few years earlier. Just letting everybody know that.
Quickly on that, Lewis, do you think, just on that point as well, do you think that has come because of what happened the other day? Do you think that case would have been dropped if the assassination attempt hadn't taken place?
I haven't looked at the article yet, but it's more likely due to the fact of his immunity case linked to
the Supreme Court.
Yeah, but we can definitely talk about that at another point, because I could talk about it all day. But on the point of what's going to happen next, I spoke to Hunter earlier from Roor Rota, and he was very cautious to make predictions, and I understand that as well. Making predictions mostly doesn't always turn out right, but right now, what we know is Biden keeps saying he's going to be the candidate. I don't know if it's going to switch people from Biden to Trump. What I do know is that if Biden already appears weak, he probably now appears weaker against somebody who looks even stronger than they were last week. And a lot of people do buy into that strong man kind of vibe. So it could possibly just further disenfranchise Biden voters from turning out. He only won the election by, 50,000 votes across 3 states the last election. So who knows what might happen? Could he be replaced? Leading up to the assassination, I think we're about 12 to 16 Democrats from between the Senate and the House who have called for Biden to step down, and about $90 million of donations were frozen by his super PAC saying, please stand down. So it's probably slowed down now because of the assassination, but there will be more calls for him to step down, and we've only got a few weeks left to switch him up as a candidate. So the only person who can make that happen is Biden, though. There is no process to actually get rid of him as the person at the top of the ticket.
I mean, if you ask me, I think that that image, what we had up earlier, that is solidified the election win of Donald Trump. Now, I don't buy into the idea that this is the only reason. I mean, you're forgetting the fact that Biden has been abysmal. It started with Gaza, of course, but also the fact that this guy is senile, right? So he was probably going to lose anyway. But what I think, what happened in Pennsylvania has kind of solidified it because of two things. One, Lewis, you are absolutely right. This isn't just in the US, but this is everywhere. People like a strong leader. They just do. And Biden is increasingly looking weak and Trump is looking strong. But also, it's not necessarily voters switching from Biden to Trump. You're not going to get that much, are you? The problem is turnout, right? You're going to get people who are disenfranchised with Biden, the fact that he needs to drop out. Doesn't look like he wants to. You're going to get a lot of people who might sit at home. Whereas Trump, on his side, you've got people who are reinvigorated. And I think that's what it's going to come down to. More people are excited and are going to push to vote for Trump. I think Trump is going to win. What I want to ask the panel, though, and we've got 10 minutes left, is the fallout, not in terms of who wins the election, but let's say, and in my opinion, I think Trump's going to win. Let's say Trump wins. I personally think the US is over. I mean, this is going to be, and I know we talked about like being cautious with our rhetoric, but I don't think it's wrong to say that this is going to be fascism because Trump didn't do a lot of things he wanted to do the first time. This time he's going to be back with a vengeance. He is going to seek repercussion from his political enemies. He has got look at what's happening in terms of Project 2025, where people say it's nothing to do with Trump. Of course it is. That's going to come into fruition. I think what's going to happen with Trump coming to power is going to be extremely dark. I don't know if you guys agree with that. I'd love to get your thoughts on it.
Well, I'll quickly start on, obviously, Project 2025, which everyone's talking about now, or at least people who are mostly politically engaged. It's basically a policy document, essentially, an idea, a plan put forward by the Heritage Foundation. So this isn't abnormal. Like most groups, foundations, organizations, when a president or a local politician, whoever it is, comes into power, they will say, here's a policy for you. Can we work together on this? The difference is with what's being put forward with Project 2025 is that most of the people who have created it were former Trump staffers and linked to the organization. It's generally a plan to get rid of anyone in the civil service or whatever they may call it over there, and replace about 50,000 people if they don't literally declare their loyalty to Trump. They want to use the military to deport about 11 million people. They basically want to abolish the Department of Education. And what's made it easier now is that over the last few weeks, we've had a few Supreme Court rulings, which is going to absolutely bolster Trump. Firstly, we have his immunity hearing, which basically has given him not complete immunity, but a lot of more immunity than he previously had in regards to what he can get away with. So he's going to feel emboldened by that. And then one that didn't make it too much into the news, especially the British media, was the Chevron case, which essentially what it means is that any legislation, any that's ever been created in the US, if it's not specific enough to tell a government agency exactly what they need to do, it can essentially be overturned. So if a piece of legislation which says to the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, make the air clean, they pass that bill could essentially be just overturned now because it's not specific enough. And this is actually going to give a lot of power to a lot of organizations to basically take down multiple powers from multiple federal agencies, which essentially might give Trump even more power. So he's emboldened. He's got more immunity. He's just had a case dropped. He has more cases pending, but now he has more immunity. And he's got a massive plan that's been put forward, ready and made for him of exactly what he needs to do to essentially take over the country. So, yes, it's
the end
very
of
dark days.
That is the end of US democracy. I mean, obviously, there's the question about how viable liberal democracy is in the US, but that is essentially the end of democracy. And I guess what it does because Project 25 has been around for a few years now. Obviously, it's only come to the limelight in the media recently, but it's been talked about for a while, which might kind of shit on our previous analysis, which is that given what happened with the assassination attempt, it's changed things. But rather, we could be wrong, and in fact, it didn't matter what happened in terms of Pennsylvania, because this seems like these policies from Project 2025 were going to be enacted anyway. So it's not like that, well, they're going to enact the end of US democracy, but do it nicely. But now the assassination attempt has happened, we're going to do it horribly. I mean, the end, trying to overthrow democracy is always pretty damn horrible. So I guess, in a sense, maybe the assassination attempt made zero difference, because it wasn't like Trump wouldn't have enacted these policies of giving himself more power and taking away power from the people. It's not like that would have changed anyway. I mean, Callum, let's get you into this.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, and I think it's going to be a dark time for America. And actually, I think nowhere near to the same extent, but I think it's going to be a difficult 5 years, whoever wins the election, because President Biden's not. He's clearly struggling anyway. Like I think even if he wins the presidency, that it's going to be some difficult days ahead for America. Purely selfishly, though, I am extremely grateful that this time around, if we do have a Trump presidency in the US, we're going to have a Labour government here in the UK. Regardless of what we think about Labour and Keir Starmer, I am relieved that we're not going to see another Theresa May moment where she's walking hand in hand with Donald Trump.
That will still happen, I think.
Do you? I mean, I'm hoping it won't. I mean,
I mean, that's a good question. Let's bring it back to the UK for a second. What does a Trump presidency look like under Keir Starmer? I think I kind of agree with you that yes, like Keir Starmer isn't a fucking nut job like some of the people in the Tory party, but we know Starmer is so weak. We know that he always subverts, subsumes himself to power. Trump is going to be a very powerful person.
Yeah,
Starmer doesn't have a spine, so even if he internally doesn't like it, what difference would it be that Starmer is an unwilling participant to Trump versus a Tory PM who is willingly a participant? What difference does that make?
I think it helps that our foreign secretary is on the record multiple occasions of completely ripping Trump apart in terms of
I think that
what
means
he thinks
nothing.
about
But David Lammy's a liar. I mean, he said stuff before.
He is.
I think you give way too much credit to David Lammy there.
He is, but he doesn't like Trump. That I don't think that's a secret. Like David Lammy, he doesn't like Trump. He doesn't agree with Trump's policies. He thinks a lot of pretty. I mean, we were talking earlier about comparing people to Hitler. I think that's something that David Lammy's done. He certainly compared him to behaving the same way as the Nazis. So I think that. I mean, whether that will. I mean, it's not going to help US-UK relations, I suppose, given that that's on the public record. But I think it will be. I think it will be more diplomatic than it was when the Tories were in charge. I don't think it will just be, let's give him a state visit and let's walk hand in hand in him and have a wonderful. I think it will be a lot more. Look, we have to work together because of the special relationship, but we don't agree. But let's try and agree where we can in order to sort of make things work. But I don't know. I mean, Lewis, what?
Before you jump in, though, I do want to say, though, that look, there's a choice here, and it is a very difficult choice. It's one, essentially side with Trump, or two, break the special relationship with the US and stand against them. That is what essentially needs to happen.
They're not going to do that, are they?
Exactly. And can you imagine Keir Starmer or David Lammy doing that? No, they will put the relationship with the US above their views on Trump. But I think that maybe historically, that might have been the statesman thing to do, the safer thing to do, because people want to have US as a powerful ally. Given that how extreme a Trump administration could be, given that the Republicans want to overthrow US democracy, you kind of have to stand against the US if that's the choice. And I don't see Starmer or Lammy doing that. Sorry, Lewis. We'll go to Lewis because I did cut him off, and then you can come around after him.
Yeah, of course.
I think when it comes to Starmer and the US, they're just going to fall in line. Most people do when it comes to the US, and
Yeah.
everybody's got the special relationship because France will say they've got the special relationship, and then Italy do, and then Ireland do,
Yeah.
and then it's just over and over again. It's like we're all vying to be friends with the popular girl, and it's not to do with that. It's just because they're so military and economically so powerful, and they have too much power in everything from the UN to other areas as well. We're just going to fall in line. Of course we are. I can predict it already. Trump says horrible thing, press conference, Chris Mason from the BBC, Trump has said this horrible thing. What do you say about that? And he'll just give some diplomatic generic response. It's just going to happen over and over again. Unless, again, if it's something that's too horrific, maybe he might tease on it, but they're just going to fall in line.
But what I don't think we'll see is a government that I think what we've had previously, looking at what Trump does and thinking, "Oh, we should steal that. Let's do that. Oh, that's a good idea. Let's copy."
Yeah,
America.
but I wonder if materially that
and-
makes any difference. Because to go back on what I was saying before, sorry to cut you off.
Right.
What I went back on before is, do we have a Labour Prime Minister who is an unwilling participant in what Trump does versus a Tory PM who is a willing participant? So, of course, David Lammy and Keir Starmer and the Labour Party absolutely do not have the same politics as Donald Trump. They are so far removed. Some people, the Conservative Party, are obviously politically closer to Trump. But does that really matter when at the end of the day, you have to stand at the power? And I think and what Lewis thinks is essentially they may not be happy about it, but materially, I don't think there's going to be much difference. They're still going to support Trump, even if they don't like it, versus the Tories maybe actually liking it but doing it.
But I think for us though in the UK, just thinking purely selfishly, as somebody that lives in the UK, I think we're going to be protected somewhat from like a copycat regime where the government say, well, if it's worked in America, let's us do it.
Sure. Yeah.
Where previously under the Conservatives, it seems like for the last God knows how long, it's been a case of let's look over the sea, see what they're doing in America, and we'll try and do the same. And I think that's where we'll benefit from having a Labour government. Absolutely. I can see Labour essentially sitting by and not speaking out when some horrendous things probably happen. But I can't see them sort of taking inspiration from Trump and continuing.
Yeah, I absolutely agree that in terms of domestic policy, of course, they won't be as bad as some right-wing Tories. I mean, they're all pretty right-wing. But I guess when it comes to policies that mutually affect us, what if Donald Trump wants to increase military bases by 500%? I mean, can you really imagine Starmer saying no to that? Probably not. Can you imagine anyone saying no to that? I don't know. So there are forces. Again, if we were to think selfishly, I'm very happy that we'd have Starmer in power versus Donald Trump as president than someone like Kemi Badenoch or Suella Braverman. I get that in terms of our domestic politics, but in terms of global politics, a lot of times what happens in global politics affects us domestically.
Yeah, I mean, and just quickly for what it's worth, though, I do want to say that I do think that as difficult of a period it's going to be, particularly if you are someone that lives in America, I do think that the next 5 years are going to be slightly safer now than they would have been had the assassination attempt been successful. And I think we need to also just take a moment to reflect on actually how lucky we are politically globally that assassination attempt was unsuccessful, because I think that if they'd succeeded in taking his life, I think that the political upheaval in America from that, I think, would have been much more serious, and the consequences would have been much more serious than even the worst of a Trumpian presidency over the next 5 years.
I do want to push back slightly on this idea of like us not copying policies from Trump under a Labour government. So it's not ever going to be as directly as that. But let's not forget, I talked about this earlier with Hunter, and I was talking about how, because of my focus on US politics, that when things happened in the US and a year and a half later, they came over here, more specifically culture war stuff, everything from, stuff in schools and gender and hormones, all this type of stuff, LGBTQ, that it came from America first. And Donald Trump is the person who took the culture wars from like down here all the way up to the top. He's the one who set the burner. So bring it back to the right of the beginning of the episode. Would Wes Streeting be trying to ban puberty blockers right now if Trump was never president, who brought the culture wars to the forefront? Because that culture war came from America. Almost everything that we have around the LGBTQ, the vast majority of that comes from America.
I mean, that is true, but I guess that's what Wes Streeting is doing is because the culture war has been successful in the country, and he's not feeling pressure directly from US politicians, but he's feeling pressure from people in this country and people in the media. So, like, for example, let's say that the culture war wasn't imported in this country and Donald Trump was president and he was pushing these transphobic policies, yet there was absolutely no appetite in the media for it. I don't think Wes Streeting would be doing it. So I think you're absolutely right that, like, the culture wars, obviously the things we're talking about today in this country has been imported from the US, but I think that the pressure is coming from people in this country. And if we weren't having this culture war thing, but Trump was doing these policies domestically, I don't see why Wes Streeting would suddenly do it because Trump is doing it.
But then contrary to what I was just saying a moment ago, then theoretically, if Trump pushes, if Trump leads with more division and hatred like he has been doing, and he stirs up more of the culture wars, then I suppose it could stand to reason that those culture wars will make themselves, will work themselves over the ocean into the UK and will dictate the next sort of big political discussions that we have over here, which could then influence the policy of the government. Think so it's an indirect consequence.
Yeah, I mean, I think essentially both are true simultaneously, right? If Keir Starmer had won the general election, if he was leader and became prime minister in 2015, for example, Wes Streeting was the health secretary, there is no chance they would be banning puberty blockers. I don't see why they would. Even if in 2016 Trump was pushing these policies and the Republicans were pushing these policies, I don't think a UK Labour government in 2016 would be pushing those policies. I think what's happening today is what Lewis and both of you have alluded to, is the culture wars have been imported by the Republicans. Sure, it started from there over here, but the pressure comes from people in this country rather than directly from Trump, even though they were the instigators before. Yeah. If you kind of understand what I'm saying, I guess it's like a longer way round of doing the same thing, but I do think it's important to delineate the two parallels here.
I agree.
Now, God, we could talk about this for another 2 hours, but it's already 25 to 10, so I do think we have to wrap it up. I do want to say thank you to everyone for tuning in. You can catch us here this Friday at 7:30 p.m. for our standard 1 hour Normal Islands live. Now, we are also on Spotify, so if you prefer to listen to us in audio format whilst you're doing other things, you can access our episodes by following the link in the description. Now, everything we do here is still voluntary, and we are trying to break out as a media organization. It's not very easy to do, but you can help us do that by making sure that Turn Left grows. So please like this video, share it across social media, share it with friends and family, let people know that Turn Left exists. But you can also support us on Patreon for £3 or £5 per month by going to patreon.com/Turn Left Media. Thank you again, and see you next time.
Patreon.com, Turn Left Media. Support independent media. Support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you, Turn Left.